Thank you. Great. Okay. I have a few prepared notes at the beginning, and then I'm just going to start riffing. So first, thank you, Nandini, for that incredible introduction, and thank you to Nandini, Virginia, Adara, Chris, Lauren, all of the staff, for those of you who are upstairs, you already heard this, and members of the Hunter Museum, as well as the Toma Foundation for providing me this opportunity to speak to you this evening. Now, the title of my talk, everybody can hear me okay? Yes. I'm projecting? Okay. The title of my talk is Garden of Metaversal Delights. And there's a subtitle I forgot to add in this slide, and it's called A Place of One's Own. The term metaverse has been around for over 30 years, and gardens have been around much longer. As natural spaces, as depictions in theology and mythology, art, and today in technology, where we can inhabit virtual gardens that can delight us and sometimes surprise us with absurd juxtapositions of old and of new, of real and fake, and of beauty as well as abjection. Regarding my subtitle, A Place of One's Own, what it asserts is the absolute necessity for artists of all positionalities to be afforded space, local and remote, mental and physical, for their creative practices. In inhabiting art spaces as individuals and then communities, filling them with our identities and stories, we then make place. So I'm happy to share space and place with all of you this evening. And then the piece as my introduction, and those of you who have been sitting here for a while, I apologize. You've had to see it loop and loop. It's titled, Take Another Piece of My Heart. And I thought that that was appropriate since yesterday was Happy Valentine's Day. And it also speaks to my relationship with social media. It's complex. And then here's my CV, but I don't need to read that out. It just gives you a frame of reference for things that I'm going to be speaking about tonight. The last thing I want to mention is this morning I had the incredible opportunity to go to CGLA, Chattanooga Girls Leadership Academy. So that was, yeah, let's give a round of applause. And it was really fantastic. I got to share my work with all of the young women there. And then we also engaged in a workshop together. And I want you to all stay tuned because they all made drawings based on things they'd like to see in the world. It was a world building exercise. And I built this application. It's called Social VR. What does that mean? You probably have heard about virtual reality. You put on the goggles and you're transported into another space. Well, there are now, thanks to technology, there are possibilities for inhabiting virtual spaces on websites. And you can either enter them with a headset, goggles, or just on your browser. And all these people, you show up as an avatar. You're kind of funny looking, but you know, you have to have a sense of humor. And so these spaces are three-dimensional environments that you can inhabit with other people. So you're making place and wander around. So I built a little bit out earlier today, and it is going to be over the next few days, because I have all of their drawings documented. Their drawings are going to be inserted into this new world that we all created together. And it is going to be free and accessible 24 hours a day. So once we get it finished, I hope you will visit. Okay. And let's see, I think I'm going to go to my next slide. And I have a few more notes, and then I'll be done, and I'll just, riff, as I said. Okay, so some of you have seen this upstairs, and again, I'm thrilled that this is part of the exhibition Network Nature. Also, it's really exciting, 2024 marks 10 years since I first produced this work as a moving image work. And 2 guiding principles inform my work. And one is to question as many things as I can and imagine unexpected responses to my questions. So I reassemble at oblique angles to their original context, all these speculations on the past, present, and future. And I endeavor to make these places of my own. Okay, I'm going to stop reading from notes now. I wanted to sound smart at the beginning, and now I'm just going to talk about what I do. So when I was upstairs, a few of you were there, and I'm so happy that there's such a great crowd here tonight and the people who have joined since then. I was talking about when I first embarked on this, I made a sketch of hell as a digital print back in 2013. And I put it in a gallery, and I was so afraid I was going to get laughed out of the gallery. Because what is she doing? Garden of Earthly Delights, this famous painting, a 500-year-old painting that we've been puzzled about for centuries. And she's put all these emojis, you know, and emojis, if you think, they're very ubiquitous now. But it was still a pretty new language. And I'm just checking. Oh, okay. I'm going to just keep projecting. Okay. It was still a new language at the time. And one thing that was fascinating to me was that I spend a lot of time on the internet. Anybody else do that? But I had never seen the original Bosch painting in physical reality. I only knew it in reproductions, and I particularly knew it on the internet. And then I also knew this new language, this sign and symbol system as a shorthand expression for emoting, right? And so I decided to mash them up and see what would happen. And I did, and surprisingly, it was well received. It resonated with people. And so I decided to then expand it and complete the triptych, both as a physical print that's 13 feet by 7 feet. Those of you who've seen the original know I got it a little off. Google gave me the wrong measurements, so it's a little bigger than the original. And then I decided to animate it. And what was really liberating about the animation was then I could, one, compare and contrast how the symbols of emoji relate to some of these enigmatic symbols that Bosch used. I got to make new emojis too, because he has a lot of chimera, these weird creatures. So I made up my new kind of lexical set of emojis, and I got to expand them in all sorts of different ways in terms of diversity and representations of humans, for example, and weird creatures and nature and things. But also in animating it, I got to tell stories that I feel like speak a little bit to our time too. And so, for example, in the middle panel, we see that it is depopulated of humans and animal species, and we just see this return to nature. Well, that, at the time, I was thinking about the Anthropocene. I mean, what is going on? You know, that for the first time in human history, we are really kind of affecting patterns of climate in our environment. And so just thinking about that, and so I got to take this Bosch kind of vernacular, but overlay it with things that I was thinking about in contemporary culture. Likewise, in Paradise, these things start to, and I've been in New York City for 29 years, so these things start to fall down from the sky, and it is transformed into this arid climate. And then for Hell, which I have mentioned before, is, for whatever reasons, the most fun to work with because it's just so strange. Hell freezes over. But I was inspired by a Robert Frost poem. Some say the world will end in fire. Some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if I had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. Okay. Now, Wayback Machine. In putting together this talk, I started thinking about making the Garden of Emoji Delights seemed kind of like a pivot for me based on the work I was making at the time. I was starting to incorporate emoji into my work, but my work was aesthetically a little bit different. And then I look back at my early paintings from the 90s before I began to expand my practice into working with digital technologies, and I started to see some through lines. And I wanted to share them with you because this is kind of a long path, or longish path I've been on. And so these paintings from the 90s, I was studying at Boston University, and I had been a figurative painter since I was a child, growing up in Oxford, North Carolina. And I started to explore abstraction. And so certain tendencies start to emerge in these paintings from 1995. One, the color palette. And I am also a maximalist. Anybody noticed? And even in the abstraction, these kind of swirling abstractions, you also still see kind of figurative elements, but in these more symbolic, abstract ways. Now, if we go even further back, these are some works from 1993 to 94. And identity surrogates, as I continue to show work tonight and show other works outside of just the Garden of Emoji Delights, you'll see how much identity surrogates start to play in my work, my more recent work. But they were already emerging then as these kind of dresses. Now, I grew up in the South, and one thing, you know, my mother loved when I was a small child to put me in dresses, even crinolines and all of that, you know. And so the dress became a kind of symbol for me where I could use that instead of just a representation of myself and express different kind of emotions or different thoughts and feelings I was having. And then something else you start to see emerge in these early works, those are both oil paintings and drawings, is an interest in the surreal. So surrealism and the absurd. Now, getting into some more explorations of the garden. As I show more work tonight, you'll see this is a tendency of mine since the late 90s and early 2000s too. I tend to work with a theme or idea or concept and explore it across media channels. I think some of that comes from the fact that I started studying piano. I studied classical piano. This is an anecdote I have to share with you all. I grew up in a town of 7,000 people. My painting teacher was also my piano teacher. Yes. And guess what her name was? Miss Painter. It was spelled P-A-Y-N-T-E-R. But she had such a significant impact on me. So the reason was she was a Renaissance woman for me in Oxford, North Carolina. She could play beautifully, but she could paint too. And so I took lessons from her. And then at one point, she had so many students wanting to take piano lessons from her that I started teaching piano when I was 14 because I've been taking it so long. And when I would compose things as a musician and a musical score, sometimes we'd have recitals and I'd compose something for piano, but then I'd transpose it to different keys. And so what I feel like in terms of my practice today as a digital artist is I'm doing that same thing. I'm giving you a theme and variation. So I create something as a moving image work, for example, or a print. And then I'm like, well, let's transpose it to a different key. What happens when it becomes a sculpture or a drawing? And so this is something that you're going to see throughout my work of the past, say, 20 years. And one other funny anecdote. All right. Yes, a lot of my work is about remix. I mean, I took Bosch's painting and I took emojis that are designed by, designers. And there's something called fair use. And so in doing this work, that was a fair use scenario. But then one day, someone wanted to put me in a show, and they're like, send me a picture of the Garden of Emoji Delights. This piece kind of went viral, surprisingly, and so instead of even going to my hard drive, I just go online to search it, to find a picture, right? And I find these dresses, and they're dresses with Garden of Emoji Delights on them. And I'm like, that's strange. I didn't make dresses. They were selling them online. And they weren't giving me any credit, and people had all sorts of comments. Wow, that's such a great idea. I'm like, yeah, well, that was my idea, and Bosch's, and emoji designers. But it was in a different country, so I really didn't have recourse because there are different kind of copyright laws in different countries, right? But what did I do? I just stole their idea, and I made dresses. And it was for a show about icons and iconicities, so I took Barbies. Anybody see the Barbie movie? I've seen it twice. And so I created these body modified Barbies. They're 3D printed. And then I dressed them with Garden of Emoji Delights dresses. I've also done augmented reality. So these are some examples of the augmented reality works that I produced. And one more fun story that I shared upstairs, but I want to share it again. I finally got to see the original Garden of Earthly Delights in 2016, and it was a very impactful experience. It's amazing to stand in front of a painting that has resonated with people around the world for over 500 years and continues even with my students. My students, are aware of this painting when they might not be aware of Madonna, right? Or the Madonna, the singer, I mean. And so one thing I did, though, is I created an augmented reality experience for this exhibition at Baruch College in New York, and I used images from the original painting as the triggers. So what happens is when you hover your phone or your screen, your tablet over that original section of a Bosch painting, my 3D versions pop out. When I went to the Prado, they didn't allow photography at the time. I don't know if they do now, and we're not recording this part, right? I keep telling people, don't tell my secret. I surreptitiously whip out my phone, and I have, over the original Bosch, my 3D renderings. And I've documented that. But one person told me I deboshed a Bosch. And then in 2022, I was invited to Graphiska in Tallinn, Estonia. And I got to go, which was really Tallinn. Has anybody been to Tallinn, Estonia? Yeah. Oh my God, it's a fabulous place. And to commemorate that visit, I created a new version. So I'm always versioning and kind of expanding and adapting and evolving things. And this was using a new platform. Has anybody heard of blockchain and NFTs? Yes, yes, and it has been very contentious. I know that. But at the time, a lot of people were quizzical about it, particularly in terms of environmental impact, but also is it ethical, and do people just want to make money? But I worked with the museum to create this edition that the NFT sale would actually go to support Ukraine at the time. Thank you. Now, getting into some of the identity aspects of my work. So Wayback Machine, again. 1992, that's me. I just moved to the Northeast at that time, and I felt a little like a fish out of water at the time. I was in Boston, and where I went to grad school. Then 2006, I have pivoted or evolved again into making works with other technologies. And then by 2016, I am working with technologies like augmented reality. Now, my work as a maximalist involves a lot of different influences. And so these are just a few, but one, Velázquez and how he's there in his own, his portrait of these royals, he inserts himself. So in that first one, I'm thinking about Velázquez, I'm thinking about art history, I'm asserting my identity as an artist. But also I'm thinking about, wow, when I look at art history, I don't see many people like me, female. So I found somebody like Judith Leister, really awesome. She did a lot of self-portraits. And so those were things that were going on in my head as, like a 20-something. Then by the time I get to I Dream of Jeannie Emerging from a Fresca Bottle, and we'll go back to that one, great title, huh? I'm starting to mix a lot of metaphors. And so I have a yellow brick road, I have myself dressed up as Jeannie. This exists as a video installation as well. I have these symbols of hope and butterflies flying up into the sky, but then I also have paratroopers coming down because at the time there was, as there always is, there were a lot of conflicts going on in the world. And then the Fresca bottle, so back in the 70s, Fresca was like the diet drink for women in the South, right? Before there were diet drinks. And so instead of her coming out of a fancy bottle, she's coming out of a Fresca bottle, And so speaking to also gender construction and these different kind of things that can inform how we see ourselves in society and culture. And then finally, the Yellow Brick Road. Does anybody know who wrote The Wonderful Wizard of Oz? Yes. And then he also wrote this novella, The Master Key, an electrical fairy tale. And in 1901, can I use this again? Oh, yeah, okay. In 1901, he predicted augmented reality. So you put on these goggles, the main character, the young boy, and he would see letters on people's foreheads that indicated aspects of their personality. Otherwise, they were invisible to the naked eye. And so he's already thinking about this. And that's why I feel like art and speculative thinking, speculative fiction, the creative realm is so important. I teach at an engineering school today, and I have 2 painting degrees. But I teach in a program within this engineering school where we do weird things with technology as artists and designers. And we can cross-pollinate. And we come up with these ideas, and maybe we're just asking questions. And then programmers and computer scientists can come in, but they've been inspired by the artists. So I feel like that's so important. And then something else, I'll get a little bit more into this project. Actually, I'm going to keep going because I know we've got this thing called time. You can't be here all night. I'd love to stay with you all night, but I'm going to speed up a little bit. This is just showing some other works where I've explored how identity is changing in relationship to technology. So in 1998, I created my first avatar. Her name was Sister Gemini. And she came from this place called No Place. Half my family's from the Appalachian Mountains. And she played with an electronic dulcimer, because my grandpa, Talbert, used to create dulcimers and banjos and violins. He called them fiddles. And so she's playing this thing called an electronic dulcimer. If somebody knows if there is one, I haven't found one yet, but I'd love to, produce one. And so Sister Gemini was a way for me, at the time, to support myself in New York. I'd started working in web design. And I kept up my art practice. I'd go home every night and make art. But I started to make it through these avatars, because I was starting to see this emerge in culture. And then I made avatars for other people in 2002. I was living in this loft in Brooklyn with a lot of musicians and actors and dancers, and I made avatars for them as video sculpture. And then in 2010, I ran the New York City Marathon in 2010. Woohoo! Yeah. I trained for like 7 months, and I ran in like 4 hours, so that was, pretty decent. But then I go down to North Carolina to see, my parents now live in Creedmoor, North Carolina, population like 3,000. And so there wasn't a lot for me to do. So I was online playing this game called Second Life. And I have an avatar there. Her name's Jezebel Langley. Well, I got jealous of her. She can run like a marathon, then she can run another one, and then she can run another one. She can fly. She can teleport. She can, like eat a lot of cake and then still be skinny, whatever, And so I staged a race against my avatar. And it's really funny. My mom and dad was like, Dad, get the truck. We're going to go shoot a video. And so we just found like this, kind of empty highway, and I ran down the middle of it, and I found a highway for her to run down the middle of in Second Life. Okay, we're going to show a little bit of Sister Gemini. So this is 640 by 480 video. Anybody who knows video, this is tiny. This is like a postage stamp compared to the video quality we have today. So this is from 2000, 2001. And so this alter ego was also kind of wish fulfillment, because, I'm working 9 to 5 every day, and she gets to, perform her identity. She hacks metaphorically, not illegally, into websites through QuickTime videos. And this voice is one of my roommates. This is Julia Friedal singing. And so this is crude 3D from the day. I was already thinking about things like artificial intelligence. She was a cyborg. So Sister Gemini represented this dichotomy that I was already feeling in myself, being a human, but also, Donna Haraway had already written the Cyborg Manifesto, and thinking about these technologies that we were developing and how they would extend us and what those repercussions might be. We'll move on. So again, this hybrid media started to emerge. And what I mean by that, I've talked about it again, is I come up with an idea, and then I explore it and express it across a lot of different platforms. And so I was offered an opportunity to have a show in a Brooklyn-based gallery, and I decided to draw, so this is hand-drawn in a trompe-l'oeil-like stage, the cubicle, because it was during the day when I came up with Sister Gemini, and I'm in an office cubicle. So I redrew the cubicle where she first emerged, and I spent like a week drawing that. And then I had created an interactive experience with this technology called Flash. It was really popular at the time. And so it was a way to tell a nonlinear story, so you could hop around the story. It was kind of like a game, but it was an art game. It was something that was an interactive experience. And I created a comic book. And the thing that was really fascinating is the things that were left after the show was done, they painted over my drawings, boo-hoo. But the artifact was something digital. And that was the first time I also started thinking about, okay, we always preserve paintings, well, if they're considered of value by some famous artists, paintings and drawings and sculptures, but are we going to preserve our digital artifacts? And so we'll get to some of my work where I dig deeper into that. Now I'm jumping ahead to 2015, 2017. I love books. So when I was in Boston as a grad student, I worked at Rare Books at Boston Public Library. I got to work with incunabula, things that existed before the printing press. We had a lab to preserve books. My first job in New York City was actually databasing and managing, as a librarian, the John McEnroe Library. So John McEnroe had an art gallery back in 1995, and he gave money to this little art school called the New York Studio School, and they needed a librarian. And so I'm getting a painting degree, and I teach myself how to database really fast. And I teach myself about this thing called the World Wide Web, where I can download records from the Library of Congress. And that got me to New York. So I love books. I've published lots of different artist monographs. But one thing about a book, a physical book, what happens after you read it? You put it on your shelf and it gathers dust. So I decided I wanted to do an experiment, a revivification of the book. So I sold this book. It was a collection of 52 selfie drawings. And I was 44 when I started this. A little old to be doing selfies, but I was like, what the heck? I'm going to explore it and think about ideas of age estimation and body estimation and how would they be received when I started sharing them online. But I also wanted to think about, as I did with the Garden of Emoji Delights, where I have Bosch and art history collapsing into each other. So one is an art language and one is just a language of popular media. Selfies isn't something we relegate just to an art form, right? Everybody's doing it. But self-portraiture we usually think of as an artistic expression. So what happens when I collapse them together? So I made, over a year, I made one drawing a week. Based on a photograph I took, I'd slow it down and make a drawing out of it, and then I'd share it on every social media platform I was part of, so like 6 of them. Because it begs the question, is this selfie if you're not sharing it, right? And getting comments? Then over 52 more weeks, after I sold the book, I created augmented reality experiences. So every week, and I kept a website, anybody who had that book, they'd just take the book back down off that shelf, and it would pop out in their phone. And so it was a way to kind of expand the book into the virtual world. I also created, from those drawings I made, these 4K video works. And so as you see here, I've already talked about branded identity, age and body estimation, and also catastrophe culture. Because, we are living through trying times. What is this Chinese proverb, which is actually not a Chinese proverb, by the way, but may you live in interesting times, right? And we are living in difficult times. I believe this, and I work with young people, and I want to instill in them a sense of hope. And I feel sometimes that it's easy to just catastrophize. And so some of this work is thinking about this. Some of this work also, again, is referencing art history. So the top piece here you see, and this is 11 feet by 10 feet, they're moving image works, is called Nude Descending a Staircase. But she's descending a staircase into a world that's flooded, and there are thunderstorms and things like that. The one on the left is a nod to Magritte, but it has monkey on my back. And so she goes into this mirror world, and so outside there's this bucolic landscape, but in the mirror world, the world is kind of on fire. So thinking about these things and these catastrophes and working my way through them, and some of these are kind of comical when you watch them. Not that I'm making light of these situations, but I do think we have to explore the way that we kind of interpret different information that we get online, because we get a lot every day, barraged. The middle one, I'm 3D printing myself, so thinking about post-humanity, the idea now that, and these are from 2016, but it was already becoming prevalent, this idea of post-humanism, transhumanism, are we going to become cyborgs, are we going to merge with machines? And so here I'm 3D printing myself, because we're 3D printing organs now. And then to the right, this is called electronic cemetery. And this is my second version. The first one I made in 2008. And what's really funny is iPhones, they are actually the same aspect ratio as a lot of, tombstones. Yeah. These are some other ones. The top one is a nod to Dali. And it's called the eccentric, because already by this time, I'm teaching at college and people are starting to call me kind of eccentric. I'm like, yay, okay. The one on the left, I'm not going to go through all of these, but that's called Babel in Wonderland, so Tower of Babel and Bruegel. I'm a big Wonder Woman fan too. I have the original first edition of Ms. Magazine where Wonder Woman was featured. Gloria Steineman did this entire essay on her and talked about how important she had been as a role model. I went to Comic-Con 2 years ago dressed up as Wonder Woman. It was fun. But what is happening here, this show was titled A Subject Self-Defined, and I borrowed that from Joseph Kosuth. Anybody know Joseph Kosuth? He was an artist in the 60s, a minimalist artist. And at that time, how are we doing with time? Should I speed up? I'll just say this really quickly. A subject self-defined for me, at the time, we were kind of, 60s was the heyday of conceptual art and kind of emptying the art of signifiers and signified, where it was just like, the thing is a thing is a thing is a thing. And today, we have a lot that we have to muddle through in terms of what is signifying something anymore, because we have a lot of post-truth, possibilities out there on social media and those kind of things. And so I wanted to take that title, A Subject Self-Defined, where I am inserting myself in a lot of different art historical kind of milieus or scenes, and kind of complicate it, because back in the 60s, A Subject Self-Defined was actually the title of his work and a neon sign of his work. I, as a woman, at this particular moment in history, am the subject instead of the object of my work. And I love all of this art history, but I'm also asserting, like a 20-year-old at the painting like Velázquez, that I have the right to be making this art and to actually be an author. And so then I came up with this avatar. She emerged from the Selfie Subject Self-Defined project. And her name is Carla Gannis, cross-platform avatar for recursive life action generative adversarial network. And she and I have done 2 exhibitions together. And she has her own Instagram and her own Zoom. And she is a fiction. So I don't want anybody to worry about my mental health. She is a fiction, but she, like Sister Gemini and various other avatars that I have worked with, but even being on Facebook, and if you put up your profile pic or Instagram, those are called avatars. So it has become, again, something that's ubiquitous in culture and in our language and in our way of representing ourselves online. Likewise, companies make avatars of us so they can sell us more products. So Carla Gannis was a way for me to, again, dig into this and also have a little bit more autonomy over one of my representations online. And the one thing, though, she likes to pick on me because she's like, I can do this, you can't. No matter how much yoga I do, I will not be able to do that. So then I started thinking about, well, Carla Gannis, she kind of, she has gray silver skin, but she kind of looks like me. And she is inspired by Lieutenant Commander Data on Star Trek Next Generation, if I have any Star Trek fans in here. So I wanted to make these avatars that were more outlandish and more kind of absurd. So who did I turn to? Archimbaldo. And you know what's wild? I am at an art and tech conference, digital art conference in London, and I run into an Archimbaldo scholar there. And she talks to me and she's like, there's not a lot known about his work, but if you all, by the way, he was a Mannerist painter. 16th century, he made these portraits where they're comprised of fruits and vegetables, composed of fruits and vegetables, right? And what's uncanny is from a distance or even up close, you're like, that's a human, but that's an apple and an orange and a grape. And so again, I return to the vernacular emojis, and so I'm using those symbols to make these portraits. And what this Arcimboldo scholar said is that she posits Arcimboldo was trying to make the point that humans are not divorced from nature and their environment. Likewise, Jackson Pollock was interviewed and somebody said, Jackson, what's your relationship to nature? He's like, I am nature. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But we've got new natures emerging. And so this is my way of thinking about those new natures through these portraits. And also, the future doesn't have to look like that. It's so homogeneous, right? And I don't expect any engineer to build robots, because I call these, again, fictional, these different avatars like robots. They all have personalities, as you'll see soon. But it's a way for me to assert as an artist, again, that we can have different visions of the future than something like that, where everything's homogeneous and, these white robots where everybody looks the same. So somebody seemed to kind of, appreciate what I was doing, and I got the chance, and this is what's exciting about working with new technologies, is instead of showing at galleries and museums, which I really appreciate, believe me, I get opportunities to show my work in Times Square and all the advertising screens. It's something called Midnight Moment, and so they invited me to show my work, and so here are two of those rather, uncanny avatars taking over the screens. And I have lived in New York City. At that point, I'd lived in New York City for about 24 years, and I don't get up there that often. That month it was up, they play for 3 minutes at midnight every night. I was up there, I was like a fly on the wall. Did they see that that's not a Calvin Klein underwear advertisement? That is weird art. I also got to take over the Whitney Museum's website. They have this project called Sunrise Sunset, and they ask artists to produce works. They commission us, and this one was on the site for, I think, about 8 months or whatever. Math, that thing, April to February. And at sunrise and sunset, my Lady Ava interface avatar would take over every page of the Whitney Museum. Yeah. And so, that's also something that's starting to happen. These expanded definitions of what art is and where it can be. And so that was really an amazing opportunity. And Lady Ava interface is inspired by, anybody know? Lady Ada Lovelace, the first computer programmer, 1850. She was working with Charles Babbage on the analytic engine. Yeah, very cool. All right, this is one of my other avatars. This is Lucille Trackball. She's a stand-up comedian AI. Okay, I know we have to keep going, so I'm not her jokes aren't that good. I mean, if there are any computer programmers in here, she wasn't a good student. She was like a C++ student. One other thing I wanted to do when I was a kid, I wanted to be a stand-up comedian, but I can't remember the punchlines to any jokes, so I just built an avatar to do it. Now, this is just going behind the scenes. So those animations that, Lucille, you were just seeing, they're all operated by me. So I'm still kind of the puppeteer. I'm not writing algorithms and creating these AIs. I'm kind of the puppeteer. So I'm performing all these multiple identities. And so that's me in a suit, and those little, kind of dots you see on my suit are capturing all my data as I move, and I have that rig for my face, so it'll capture my facial data too. And these are just some more. Yeah, okay, see, I was not a dancer, ever. And then, let's see if that'll play. Yeah, so we're just gonna watch a little bit of this so you can see these avatars come to life. I had a show at the Halsey Institute last summer. That's in Charleston, South Carolina, and it's been a lot of time in Charleston, and this was one of the pieces that was in that show. This is like 18 minutes long. I'm not gonna put you through it, but let's just see one of them talk, and then you'll be like, wow, that looks so lifelike. It was because it was recording all my facial data and then applied to these. Wow, that's a long intro. I forgot it was so long. There you go. So when you saw me in that suit a while ago, it gets applied to her. And if anybody wants to see more of that, you can go on my website and take a look. Another opportunity that emerged that was very exciting, last November of 2022, the Perez Art Museum in Miami invited me to be their first digital artist to do an AR installation. And so this is us in Miami with my AR installation, but what was also really great, and this is another thing that I think is really vital as we think now about ways that we can redefine art, ways that we can make it accessible to larger communities of people, make it more diverse, is using a technology like AR where the logo of the museum triggers the AR. So you don't even have to go to the museum. You can have the installation. If you have the PAM logo on a website or on a card you got at the museum, you get the museum installation right there. So more people have access to art and new ways of thinking about art. And now we're getting to the show I did at the Halsey Institute. Is everybody still, because I haven't been using this the whole time. Have y'all been able to hear me? I guess so, because nobody's, okay. Wow, I really can't project. 18 years of teaching, that'll do it. Okay. This is a Wonder Camera. Anybody heard of Wonder Camera? Okay, well, if you do know of Wonder Camera, you're like, she's spelling it wrong. So it's a German word, and it's translated as cabinets of curiosity. So does that ring a bell? Yes, cabinets of curiosity. So I became really enthralled with these cabinets of curiosity around 2019, and the fact that in the 16th century, beginning in Germany and then kind of expanding throughout Europe, collectors were traveling around the world, and they were coming back and creating these cabinets, and they became whole rooms. It wasn't just one cabinet of curiosities. They were entire large rooms filled with exotica, filled with things that they had collected over their travels. They were actually precursors to museums. There before we had taxonomies and the kind of intellectual rigor that we have with museums today, and the ethics, because a lot of these things were pillaged, taken. But they were this beginning of thinking about preservation. And so I thought, well, what would be a 21st century cabinet of curiosity? And so I embarked on making one that would be kind of a virtual experience and a physical one. And so I got the opportunity to do this show at the Halsey Institute, where I could explode a work that I'd spent a lot of the pandemic alone at my computer creating as a virtual reality experience, and then kind of exploding it back out into physical reality so people could see these kind of connections and this fabric between these virtual lives that we lead and this physical reality that it's still incumbent upon us to participate in. So these are some other images. And so one thing, whenever I show this work in a physical gallery or a museum, the Halsey Institute is a museum in Charleston, as I said, I like to make a new work that represents the institution that I've shown the work. And so with my Wonder Camera project, I then kind of add another kind of cabinet of curiosity to the project. And so I took the floor plans of the Halsey Institute and created this sculpture that you see there. So that's a 3D printed sculpture. I also, throughout the pandemic, as I was continuing to work on this project, I made this series of drawings of these cabinets. I include this big cabinet that's called the video game cabinet castle. Yes, mixing metaphors. But how can you have a cabinet of curiosities in the 21st century without one that's a video game cabinet, right? And so all these other pieces are things that exist in virtual reality that are little pixels. They're uninstantiated, really. And here I'm starting to make them physical. They're also all trompe-l'oeil. So some of them you can tell they're flat here, but some of these items start to look like they have dimensions, but they're actually all flat. This is the virtual reality aspect of the work, and I have a kind of memento mori. You have to take the headset off the skull and put it on your head. And then I worked with video and holograms. So again, that theme and variations. And you might be like, well, okay, I get it once, but maybe you feel something a little different, or maybe one person has an entry point through this kind of medium. There were a lot of people in Charleston who weren't as familiar with digital art, and so the drawings were their first entry point, and then that led them to then try to experience some of the other things, like putting on a VR headset. Oh, one other thing I want to say here. That's that sculpture you saw, the little small sculpture that I made representing the Halsey Institute. Then I made a virtual reality space to represent them, and I created an archive that includes all their past shows. And that's 50 feet. So that's the other thing that's really fun about, working in these virtual spaces. You can kind of scale up, go to the macrocosmic level. This is actual physical reality. So this, based on a virtual world I built, I then translated it into physical reality for their gallery. And this came up in conversation earlier. I'm referencing a lot of things here, again, high and low things. And when I say that, like Andy Warhol, who, kind of had references to pop culture, which are kind of called low, cultural references. So this carpet comes from a film still in this 1990s movie called The Lawnmower Man. It's a cult classic. And then the top is a reference to Janet Murray's Hamlet on the Holodeck. It's a text that I always teach in class. She wrote it in 1997, where she posited in the future, art experiences would be expanded into virtual realms. They'd be dealing with databases. They'd be dealing with digital technologies, and kind of a convergence of film and theater and dance would be seen in these new digital art experiences. And so there's Lucille again. And then I also got the opportunity to work with a dance company. And so this is Annex Dance Company, and they're dancing. And then that shows you every one of those cabinets was augmented. So every one of those cabinets that represents all of these different curiosities that I think about in culture and society today could then be triggered, and they'd animate and come to life. It's just showing a little of the performance. I know it's starting to get late. People have to get to other things, so I'm almost done, y'all. The last thing I want to say is there were lots of different categories that were really important to me, including climate change, including ideas about colonization and decolonization and accessibility. So I built wonder chambers for actual experts, because I'm an artist, so I'm not an expert. So I included those in the museum show as well, and built chambers for them where they could share their resources and their scholarly research. I continue to make other works that also speak to art history. There's a piece by Courbet that is still shocking. It can get you kicked off of Facebook if you post it. And so I decided to, again, collapse that into what was a fad around 2018 of 3D printing naked women. And a lot of times, yeah, it was kind of stereotypical. And I was like, I'm going to think about like that Courbet painting and then these 3D printings of women, and I'm going to make a bronze sculpture out of it. And then I worked with some programmers, and we programmed an app. And so this is, instead of origins of the world, like the Courbet, is origins of the universe. And what is playing randomly in the app are all these YouTube videos about where we came from. The origins of the universe, of time and space, and string theory, and quantum mechanics, and those things. I then built a virtual reality version of it where she's, again, 50 feet high. Kind of like Han, a piece in 1960 by an artist name I can't think of right now, but kind of speaking to that as well. All right, and then I've got like 2 more slides, so hang on. Everybody still awake? I'm looking in the back. Okay. Another thing I've been working on is this project called Yonder. I'm from the South, so of course I'm going to say it's over yonder. But it's also, the Yonder series is thinking about the age of post-photography. And a lot of that's happening with AI. My last slide is going to be some AI stuff that I'm doing. And by the way, the Wonder Camera project, every one of those cabinets, I trained an AI on every one of my categories. So I used image data sets, hundreds and hundreds of image data sets, to train an AI on things, like climate change and representation of females in the media and these kind of things. Because one other issue that's happening with AI is it's like, oh, it could go really in a bad direction, you know, if it's not fed the right information. But getting back to this, something else I was thinking about, I have an iPhone that has, you know, and as I expect many of you have some kind of smartphone in your pocket or your purse, that has more computing power than the rocket that launched men to the moon in 1969. It's fascinating. But something else my latest, you know, smartphone has is it has these sensors where I can do volumetric scanning, 3D scanning. And I started comparing it to Impressionism, because one thing is, going back to Leonardo, who made drawings for an autonomous night, you know, in the 15th century, and then a lab in Boston a few years ago are able to recreate his drawings, and they actually come up with this kind of robot, is that art has never been divorced from technology. And the Impressionists, the invention of tube paint was a new technology, and it revolutionized painting at the time, because the artist was no longer tethered to the studio. The artist could go out and paint from life with their tube paints. And likewise, I used to do 3D scanning. We have one at NYU. It's like a $25,000 scanner. You cannot take that scanner out, right? And it's in, you know, this lab, and you can scan things in there. I have a phone, and I can just go out on the street, and I can just be scanning like this. But what I started to realize is I'm breaking the scanner, and I like to do this with technology. I like to break it sometimes, you know, because yeah, it's very easy for corporations and the people who are building these things to say, oh, stay in these confines. But artists don't do that. Like, we paint outside the lines. So I realized if I moved, the sensor was then like, oh, wait, I'm losing my register. And it started creating kind of just these fragments, these impressions of life. So when I'm flying, when I'm in a car, when I'm walking down a street in New York City, and this piece arose once we were able to go back out and mingle with other humans again, you know, masked or not, but like get back out in there after all of us were, you know, kind of isolated. And I was just taking, and I did it on my flight here, by the way. It's on my Instagram if you want to see my scans. And I just move around, and I get these impressions. And I have really enjoyed working with this aesthetic. And then I'll take them into 3D software. So the video you were watching was a commission for a gallery in Chelsea, New York, but you know, obviously I'll edit and modify things, but they start with these impressions of actual life, physical reality, but a post-photographic way of representing them, like Impressionism and then later Cubism, because photography is invented, and you know, we know the stories. Now, okay, I think I've got 2 more slides. Y'all hang on. These are these hybrid pieces. So let me tell you a little bit about them. They're kind of scary, right? These are called uncanny female objects. So something I started to discover with some of the latest AI platforms, because I've been working with AI technologies for several years now, was that some of them, when you type in a simple prompt, it gives you just a very stereotypical kind of representation of a female or a male, but they're very, very stereotypical. So I decided I'll just like play with the females because it works with UFOs, you know, because we've gotten, have you seen, there are a lot of articles now about UFOs. So I was like, uncanny female objects. And so what I started to do is train several different AI platforms. So I get hundreds and hundreds of images that they generate. And then I start to collage them together in my computer, because for me, that maxim, take something, do something else to it. Jasper Johns said that in the 60s. I still live and work by. So take something, do something else to it. So I get them from the AI, I select and curate, but then I start to modify them. And now I've started printing them on canvas, and I'm painting them. And I'm adding eyelashes, because when I was taught when I was a painter, you're not supposed to like futz with the eyelashes. So I'm just putting fake eyelashes on them. All these things you see here, they're actual wires coming out of the canvas. And then I put some hair on this one. And they're kind of scary, you know, but I wanted to complicate these representations that are starting to emerge that, again, are very homogenized, that kind of flatten out our culture and are not diverse enough. And so thank you, I'm at my last one. This is a sculpture project I'm working on that I want to make into a physical sculpture. It's not there yet, called Love and War Smart Object. All right, thank you so much for your time and attention.